So if you're watching this video, you're probably interested in trying out backpacking, or maybe have some backpacking experience. Maybe even interested in backpacking with a disability, such as I do. And I'm going to share with you some safety tips. This is just going to be like an introduction, and eventually we're going to cover all this stuff in more detail. Number one, if you do have a disability, you have to be aware of your abilities. I'm not going to discount anybody with a disability, but there's obvious things that you can't do with your disability. That's why it's called a disability. None of the information that I give here should be construed as healthcare advice. You should always know your abilities and your survival skills ahead of time and prepare accordingly. Number one on the list is you want to be careful about how heavy your pack is. Everybody, when they start backpacking, gets the biggest pack they can find, stuffs all this stuff into it, and it ends up being 40 or 50, 60 pounds. That's not always the good case. You'll find also with backpacking gear, they make stuff very light. However, that comes at a cost, literally. It's very expensive for light things. Just an example, a tarp that goes over your hammock, you can get a good one for about 20 bucks. This one that I have here in a snakeskin is a Cuban fiber tarp. It costs somewhere around a couple hundred, I think about $250 actually, but it weighs like 3 ounces. Now that's one of those things that you have to decide for you how much it's worth it, how much you go backpacking, because in that specific case of like the tarp, the regular tarps for like 20 bucks that are nylon aren't that heavy, and it was probably dumb of me to buy this, but I really like it. Also, if you're going to do hammock camping, you got to think about insulation. Your back's going to be cold in a hammock, so you have to sleep with what it's called an underquilt, which is what I use, or you can put a actual sleeping pad in your hammock. You want to lay diagonally across your hammock. I'll go over all that eventually, but that lets you lay more flat rather than curled up like a banana. And so, if you're a big guy, you got to be careful of the weight limits too. This is a Blacksburg XLC. I weigh about 300 pounds. It supports me with no problems. But again, just a regular Eno hammock can support me without any problems. But that one's way more comfortable to sleep in at night versus the Eno, which I have set up over here, which is way more comfortable to lounge around in. My camping hammock has a ridge line over the top. It doesn't make a very good chair. One of the things, especially if you have a disability, that we have to think about more than other people is, how am I going to rest along the trail, get comfortable, that kind of thing. One of my go-tos in the past was bringing the Eno hammock, because it's easy to set up, fast to set up, and makes a really good chair, and it's not that heavy. It's probably overkill for me to carry 2 hammocks in the back, but this works out pretty good. Actually, I'm going to sit in it here while we talk. What I actually recommend that you do if you are thinking about going on a backpacking trip is, number one, know your limits by exercising first. So just do some walking. You can even walk on a treadmill. Just know that you can walk a couple of miles, however far that you're going to go. And I would definitely walk further on a treadmill because it's a lot easier. Number two, you're going to have the equipment. You always want to take a flashlight. You always want to have some way to filter your water for a water source. You always want to have a shelter if you're going to be staying the night. in some insulation, like I said, like an underquilt or a sleeping bag. If you have an underquilt, they make what's called a top quilt, which is basically the top half of a sleeping bag. Like I say, we're going to get into all that in the future. You want to have some food with you, of course. I prefer to have a knife and some way to process firewood. What I take with me is a folding saw, and I'll show you a picture of that. But it's fairly lightweight. It does weigh a pound, but number one, I'm not going to carry an axe or a hatchet back in the woods, and number two, my back's not made to swing that thing all day long to get a couple pieces of firewood. Most places you can only process firewood that is dead. Of course, it burns better that way too. Some places it can be what they call standing dead. In some places it must be lying on the ground for you to process it. What are some other things we need to talk about? I think the comfort thing's what I want to cover most in this video. So number one is a way to rest. So that can be like a hammock like I have here. Technically it could be getting my big old camping hammock out and putting it up, but it's easy to put up, but it's kind of a pain in comparison to the little Eno hammock here with some, I don't have Atlas straps, but they're the same principle. So basically you have some webbing and there's loops daisy chained in there, and you just take a carabiner and put on one of those. So it's real easy. It's a real comfortable way to go about it and just hang out for a while. So if I'm going on a day hike, I always take this thing because it's awesome just to lay by the river like I am right now. See that? Awesome sight here. So a couple of other things that we can do. I had a Trichology Seat that was a camp chair that I got from Amazon. I'll show that to you guys here. It was a really good chair. It was one of the most comfortable chairs that I've ever had, and it was a good sitting height, but I was pushing the weight limit in it, and it lasted for a lot of trips, but the ground was wet one particular time and I sat in it and my leg sunk down in the mud and then twisted and broke. That made me really sad. So now what I use is a mayfly chair. Let's show that to you here. Now that mayfly chair is a mayfly A-Light. It's pretty comfortable. It's not much weight to it. It just sets low to the ground. That front bar that you saw me put on, you can leave that off if you want to save a couple of ounces, but you know, the number one thing that most people without disabilities do, if they don't just sit down on a log somewhere, they use sitting pads. Or get some water. Sitting pads are cheap. These guys got on Dutch Wear Gear. They're pretty thin, but they were really cheap. And so I got 2 of them. So you set this down, and you know, on a log or whatever, it gives you a little bit of cushion and keeps your butt from getting wet. You don't want a wet butt. No wet butts. I do have another option to go with these. The whole reason that I bought these before I got that mayfly chair, because I was all into saving ounces and stuff. I brought a lot of equipment on this little trip because number one, it's close to the truck, and number two, it's for video, and I usually don't carry this much stuff. I actually carried, you can see it over there, an axe, because I usually don't do that, and I carried a bundle of firewood that rolled down the hill when I set it down this embankment back here so I could get down. So the next thing is this Mountain Smith chair. I say chair, it's just a piece of fabric. I'll have to show you how it sets up. It actually uses trekking poles, which, side point, especially if you have weakness in your legs, you need trekking poles. A lot of people make fun of us trekking pole hikers, but that's okay, because they save me from falling at least once a trip. So let me walk back down to the truck and get the trekking poles, because I didn't bring them up here because I only went a quarter of a mile, and I'll show you how this seat works. This was pretty cheap too, like I said, I think these seating pads were like $5, $7, something like that, for both of them. I mean, for each one. And this thing down here, it was around 20. Now it only weighs a couple of ounces because it's just a piece of fabric. And all in all, it is fairly comfortable. It's not as comfortable as my Mayfly chair, which is not as comfortable as the Eno hammock for a rest. As far as ease, the easiest thing to set up is my Mayfly chair. Number 2 would be the Eno hammock, and number 3 would be this chair. That's the reason I don't use it that much anymore, only if I'm being very weight conscious, because it just doesn't give you a lot of back support, and back support's what I'm after. Feel me? I feel me. Alright, so let me go take a little walk and get the trekking poles. And that, my friends, is why I pretty much stopped carrying the Mountain Smith chair. Yeah, it's lightweight and you already got the poles with you, but it takes forever to get it to be able to sit right. You got to keep finicking with it, and then it doesn't give you very much back support. And I think I already mentioned, as far as safety goes, that you need to be sure to take a flashlight on every hiking trip. That's how people get in trouble if they're not prepared when they go out, right? I've almost been caught in the dark before I started adopting that motto. I would use a good headlamp. You got to be careful with headlamps. I do have a cheap one, and I thought it was really great till I got a good one, and then I realized my good one wasn't that good because it had a push button to turn it on, and the button kept pushing in my backpack. So now I have one where you actually have to rotate a dial to turn it on, and it's not been on by accident at all. As well as that, I always take extra batteries, because they're usually AAA and they're not that heavy at all. One of the final things that we're going to leave with you today is to think about something to protect yourself from wild animals and some crazies that you might meet out there. I carry a firearm. That's not for everybody. I understand that. I always do it legally. I have a concealed carry permit. I recommend you get one of those if that's for you. And when I'm out on the trails, I usually carry my firearm in a shoulder harness. That way it's easily accessible. Apparently that makes a lot of people mad from what I've seen on forums and stuff. You can't even talk about a firearm without everybody getting all defensive about it. Basically, if you do decide to carry a firearm, what I would go with is the largest caliber that you can safely handle with the lightest weight. For me, that ended up being what's called a Chiappa Rhino 357. It's a 6-shot revolver. The barrel is on the bottom, so it doesn't recoil as much. You don't have the muzzle rise that you do with the traditional firearm. That being said, you don't have to carry a firearm. As far as bears go, what I usually do, a lot of people have what they call bear bells, and basically they just make noise because a lot of times when a bear hears you coming, they'll go the other way. They usually smell you first. Sometimes they don't. Instead of using a bear bell, if I'm in an area that doesn't have a lot of people and I'm hiking, I use a waterproof Bluetooth speaker because I like to listen to music. I do not think that it's safe to wear headphones out on the trail. You can't hear anything around you, whether that be a bear or somebody coming up behind you. You can always have the option of taking some bear spray. I've heard varying reports on how effective it is. They do seem very sensitive to noise though. And one thing that I do always carry is a whistle. I have a storm whistle. They're not the cheapest whistles on the planet, but they're extremely loud. So it works good to signal if you need help, and it works good to scare critters away. I think that's all that I have for our safety introduction video. Just keep hiking, be safe, and don't overdo it. I see people all the time, like when I'm talking about going back to Jacks River Falls, it's 4 or 5 miles on the shortest trail. And I'll be walking out in the evening, it'll be like 2 hours before dark. They'll still be walking in. They don't have a backpack. I don't think they have a flashlight or any food or any camping gear. Don't be these people. Oh, I do have one more thing that I'll share with you as far as safety goes. If you have a disability, such as me, and you decided, hey, I'm going to start backpacking back in the middle of the woods alone, you need a way to get help. So the easiest way is if you have cell phone coverage. But guess what? A lot of these places don't have cell phone coverage. There's no cell phone coverage here in Goforth Creek, Polk County, Ocoee, Tennessee. So how can I get a hold of somebody if I need help? Give me just a second to find my surprise. This is not the cheapest way to go. This is a very expensive endeavor, but safety is something that's worth spending money on. I have an inReach Explorer, so it's a satellite, but not only to help you find where you are or where you want to go, and actually I'll say these things, I've spent significant time like researching and trying to see how to map your routes and stuff, and it's really not all that helpful. It gives you like more of a general direction along your route, but that's what a compass does. Garmin has bought this company, so everything's through Garmin now, and they have some new models. I think this was about $500 when I bought it, and there is a monthly fee, but the monthly fee is because of this SOS button and the communication aspect of this. So this, and they have something called the Spot that has some pre-made text messages where your family can look and see where you are, and it has like an SOS button, and it has some communication. I like this. The reason I like this is because this will Bluetooth to my phone, which I always have, as well as it's got save messages and stuff in here if your phone runs out of battery. I always take a charging bank with me. I looked into like some solar options and that kind of stuff, but your phone will Bluetooth with this. So number one, it'll show you on a map where you are, and you can see on here it don't show you the map. but it'll show you the route that you've been on, so it's easy to backtrack your way. As well as you can save waypoints on here to see where you are in correlation to other places. Now every 10 minutes this will drop like a cookie crumb to show where you're at. And like I said, it'll Bluetooth to your phone, and so with that what it'll do is it'll send text messages from your phone through the GPS to your loved ones and such, as well as the SOS. And I do subscribe to some emergency insurance through there as well. That's not that much for a yearly rate, but I really like this thing. I use it every hiking trip that's over like a mile long. It was already in my bag because I was going to go to Jacks River Falls, or I probably wouldn't have brought it here because at the farthest I'd be going a mile here. But like I said, I carried a bunch of toys up here so I can tell you a little bit about how it goes. So stay tuned for the Gimpy Camper. We are taking a trip this weekend in the camper, do some little glamping with the wife. She don't like it when it's hot. It has to be like 70 degrees, and she'll enjoy car camping with me. I've never took her on a backpacking trip. We're going to get there though. I got plans for her. But that's why I bought a camper, really, so we can have more family time in the outdoors. So this weekend we're going to go to Fall Creek Falls, and we'll give you a campground review there, tell you what it's all about. So keep on camping. See you next time.